So hi everybody, I'm Karin Goodburn, I'm a member of SFAM, just mentioned that. I'm DG of the Chilled Food Association. We represent manufacturers of chilled prepared foods, largely multi-component foods, but can be something as simple as a washed lettuce leaf as well. All of our foods require chilling to retain their shelf life and maintain safety, etc. So I'm going to give an overview of this one. The regulation is extremely complex. I do not like legislation. I'm a scientist, and I'm going to go through this from the perspective of the food businesses and work that I've been leading for the UK industry through the Food and Biosize Industry Group, and also work we've done through the Global Food Safety Initiative. So it's a sort of international activity that we've got. There's a big health warning on this because the regulations in Great Britain are now on biocides under the control of the Health and Safety Executive, and there's looks like some extremely complex regulatory environment is going to descend on us just to make things even more difficult. Certainly if we want to export food to the EU, we need to comply with EU law, and this is largely going to be focused on the EU law because we can't really exactly say what's going to be happening in Great Britain. So big statement up front: food hygiene biocides assure food hygiene and protect public health. So we have to, by law, keep food safe, make sure food is safe. That's General Food Law 178 2002, for those who are interested. And biocides are used worldwide in disinfectants, in sanitizers, in households in a very uncontrolled way. That's certainly in my household. Much more controlled in professional food producers, and then again questionable food service if a small outlet. How's it being used, and then of course at retail as well. For hygiene biocides, any sort of biocides to be legal, they have to be supported by a huge dossier of information and a review process going on through the European Biocidal Products Regulation, which is going to be 9 years old. And indeed, I've been working on this since 2012 when this really started to hit big time on the food hygiene perspective. There's a strange bit of European law, certainly an approach that says if a material has been used anywhere in the world as a pesticide, then it shall always be considered in European law, 396/2005 in particular, which sets MRLs, as a pesticide, even if nobody's used it for decades. So we had a real problem at the beginning of all this in 2012, that the PPP legislation, plant protection products legislation, did not consider food hygiene assurance uses. And that we've changed that now. The regs actually have taken into account that biocides, some of these specific ones that have been used as pesticides in the past, they are being used for food hygiene assurance, and we have to, by law, keep food safe, and we have to clean and disinfect. So we have changed things, but it's been a lot of hard work by a lot of people working together. So what are chilled foods? Before I go into this, so we talk about pizza, pasta, soup, sauces, dishes, ready meals, side dishes, prep fruit and veg, desserts, handheld snacks, delicatessen products, etc. And these in the UK are very short shelf life, normally sort of 1 to 10 days. Sandwiches, sushi, normally about 2 days shelf life in retail that I'm dealing with. So there's all sorts of different products, and my members largely assemble them. Something like this chocolate pudding in the middle is sort of made, it's actually made in the factory. But other things like the sandwiches, there's no cooking of chicken in the sandwich factory, so all the components are brought in. And a lot of these foods are ready to eat. And because they're ready to eat, and that's these examples shown in green here, they have to comply with the EU microbiological criteria rules. That's Reg 2073, 2005. And we're allowed no more than 100 per gram of Listeria monocytogenes in any of these foods, but everybody is aiming for 0, and I'll show you how well we're doing on that. So we have a high demand for high hygiene foods. And the other factor for the chilled food industry in this country is that we are 95% plus retailer own label. So you wouldn't know as a consumer that, you know, who makes the Marks and Spencer or Tesco or Sainsbury's or Asda or Waitrose or any of those, ready meal or salad, etc., etc. It's our members who make these foods. The retailers have their brand on it and control it, and are all over our membership demanding the standards because it's their brand protection we're working for. So there's a lot of demand, and it's not a question of sort of asking how high you jump. You you just jump as high as possible. On Mysterio, this is our main focus of attention for many reasons. I would say largely because it's the main cause of death from foodborne illness in the EU. It isn't, as far as I'm aware now, in the UK, because we have a low case rate, and everybody's now familiar with case rates because of COVID. Per 100,000 is the case rate. And I'll show you some data how we perform with the rest of Europe in its broadest sense and worldwide. So there are about 20 Listeria species. Only one is legislated for, that's monocytogenes. That's a known human pathogen. Widespread, it's an environmental pathogen. Up to 10% of people carry it, depending on who you are and what your work involves. If you're engaged with sort of animals and all the rest of it, does increase your risk. There's a long incubation period. We've got a high mortality rate. It grows in the fridge, albeit slowly, when other organisms don't. It survives freezing, quite heat resistant, doesn't mind if there's no oxygen, salt tolerant, reasonably pH tolerant as well, forms persistent biofilms and surfaces, so we have to keep on top of cleaning and disinfection. You can't allow biofilm to build up, real havoc if it does. Vulnerable groups in society, of which probably 20% of the population estimated, are particularly susceptible to this, as with any disease. And transmission is from infected food, the environment, mother to fetus as well. So spontaneous abortions, stillbirths is another classic of Listeria monocytogenes. So we don't want any of that. There's massive effort over the last 30 plus years on controlling LM, and it focuses on hygiene, and it focuses on cleaning and disinfection and doing things properly in terms of cross-contamination avoidance and factory management as well. So we cannot afford to lose biocides from the armory. Everybody knows about biofilms on this, but we've got a process that will happen over minutes to hours, and then ultimate on the right-hand side, the huge blob with cellular detachments with a very mature biofilm there, breaking off into the environment and scattering living cells elsewhere into the environment. So this is why we need to keep on top of hygiene and stop biofilms forming. We produce guidance through the Food and Biocides Industry Group, FBIG, and that's published online, and I'll go into that a little bit later on. So we have cleaning and disinfection, of course, and we validate and monitor it, and I'll show you our data. So how are we doing? Well, listeriosis is not the major, it's about number 5 in terms of number of human confirmed cases from the latest European data I can get hold of. So about 2,500 cases confirmed across broader Europe. So this includes EEA and EFTA countries, and it probably will include us as well still. So you might say, well, it's only 2,500 cases. It's 1% of the Campylobacteriosis cases, but look at the mortality rates and hospitalization. So listeriosis, 97% of those 2,500 cases were hospitalized. You can get a very mild flu-like illness, but there's septicemia and meningitis type of symptoms as well, which is really the most particularly dangerous sort. And when you look at the deaths, the number of deaths in 2018, this was around Europe, was 229 for Listeria monocytogenes causing listeriosis, which is more than the rest of the top four combined. All the famous stuff, Campylobacter, Salmonella, Shigatoxin-producing E. coli, and even Yersiniosis. And I've added the column fatality rate on the right-hand side here, just to show you how much more dangerous it is if you get it than Campylobacter. So 520 times the fatality rate of Campylobacter. And you might even think that Shigatoxin producing E. coli is pretty vicious, but that's only Listeria 71 times the fatality rate of that, according to these data. So, and these data vary year on year. And I remember 2013, for example, which is not shown here, that Listeria was, well, should we say 1,300 times more deadly than Campylobacter, for example. So we have to keep on top of this, huge effort. This is my where not to go on holiday slide, as I like to refer to it. And there's a lot of data here, but you'll be able to see it elsewhere. So I've just taken the broad European data, and in red, sort of starting from the left, 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18. And in red are the countries that are coming out above the, I called it EU mean, but it's European mean. The European mean case rate hovers around 0.5 per 100,000 population. which considering how many people there are in the EU comes out 2,500 for the last set of data. So it always hovers around that, sometimes a little bit below, sometimes above. And it's this usual suspects in the red zone. Scandinavian countries, I'm half Finnish, I'll take responsibility for lots of raw fish and delicatessen products. It's really meat, fish, cheese, high proteinaceous stuff, long shelf life in particular, good amount of time for Listeria to grow, and requires chilling, which suppresses other organisms growing as well. And then we got Portugal, Spain tend to pop in there quite a lot, Spain's been near the top quite a lot. And you just think of tapas culture there. So proteinaceous food sitting out, so it may be a lovely glass of wine and the rest of it, but it's not going to do anything with Listeria. And then we have all the delicatessen charcuterie type of dominated cultures. And we're down here, we're below the blue bar consistently, and I was working to keep it there. And in the last few years, we've been at 0.25 per 100,000-ish. It's about half the EU mean rate of listeriosis. So we're doing better than practically all other major European countries. And we are not going to let legislation which hasn't been thought about properly destroy that. In comparison, some case rates on the left, South Africa had a very large outbreak in 2017-18, and their case rate was 1.84, and we were hovering about 0.3, around, well, no, actually 0.225 at the time, so it was 7 times plus our rate. We're also just hovering below the US rate, which banned Listeria monocytogenes from food, but of course you have to do something about it. You can't just make a law and ban it, and Listeria occurs naturally in the environment. So there's some comparative data. So now you know, well, it's just as well we're all locked in, isn't it? Then we have to think about different biocides and how susceptible organisms are to them. And in general, this is something I pinched from Peter Littleton of Cleansan. Well, Chris Dane, sorry, forgive me. And on the left, we have the most vulnerable organisms to biocides, so enveloped viruses. And guess what? SARS-CoV-2 is down there. Very easy to deal with in terms of hygiene. Soap and hand washing does the job, breaks up the lipid envelope. Gram-positive bacteria like Listeria then are next in this scheme of things. And the top right, we've got prions, which are the proteins which are behind BSE and CJD. So there's inherent resilience to biocides. There's a graduated scale of it. So for Listeria monocytogenes, this is a piece of work that I've taken from the Safe Smoked Fish website. Anybody into smoked fish industry, this is a fantastic site. I didn't say it just because I was involved in building it, but and doing the project, but it's a very good repository of information for high risk food and how to deal with it and how to sample it and all the rest. So we can see if we compare these mean reduction rates, these are from challenge tests on pieces of material, so not food material, this is food contact surfaces. And we can see that quaternary ammonium salts, the bottom row, has about a 6 log reduction on the artificially contaminated surface. That's when you've cleaned off the protein residues, so it's effective cleaning. And on the right-hand side with the red block, you can see it's about a 10-fold less effective if you don't clean the protein off. Quartz are classed as a plant protection product under EU regs because they're used somewhere in the world at some point as a plant protection product. So an MRL is being proposed to be set, which would be catastrophic for food hygiene unless we try and achieve what we've got on the chlorate, which I'll go into at some length. You see hypochlorite on the second row of data is nearly there with Quartz on the efficacy scale when the protein's been cleaned off. That's against Listeria mono, and there's a dramatic reduction on the right hand side, sort of half the number, and this is logs, so it's a very large difference if you don't clean the protein off for the efficacy of hypochlorite. Hypochlorite has tendency to should we say result in chlorate, ClO3 ion, so that's the big issue, and chlorate is what we're going to talk about largely here with a dash of Quartz. I mentioned that we have to by law do cleaning and disinfection where necessary, and certainly high risk foods, that's our foods, the ready to eat, supports the growth of pathogens, that's high risk food, and we have to by law clean and disinfect. So how well are we doing? There's some old UK surveys, and they were very general, looking at cut slice meat and sandwiches sold through small outlets, produced by small outlets, and then supplied through major multiples. And there was a marked difference in prevalence of Listeria monocytogenes, and it was lower in the supermarket food, was because this demand for hygiene and chilled chain security and the rest of it. There was an EU sample as well, 2013 it was published, and they called it a large survey. It was 13,088 food samples. They looked at the main priority groups, fish, meat, cheese there, and they found massive prevalence. I'm quite horrified by the meat and fish prevalence here. And the 100 per gram, as I said, was the legal limit, and they found about 1% of products of fish at the point of sampling, didn't define what point of shelf life it was, exceeded the law. And at the end of shelf life, 1.7% did. So that's really not good. So what does good look like? These are our data, which I just showed this. We have 3 million data points, and it's very detailed. We collect information all the time from members, and they share it, and they use it for benchmark purposes, so they can see how well they're doing against the rest of the industry. So on ready-to-eat food, there's about 1 million samples in this data set over the last 12 years. We go back to 2003 on food, 2006 on production environment, but we just can't fit it on the screen, so I just quote the last 12 years. So the last 12 years on the food, the ready to eat, it's about 0.7% LM detectable at any point. And of that, 0.0002% is present at quantifiable levels. So anything you can actually count through standard techniques, which we refer to 20 per gram as being the LOQ on that one. So we're doing quite well on that. Better than the surveys have shown, the sort of more public surveys. On the production environment as well, we look at non-food contact and food contact surfaces during production and post-hygiene, and we're looking for under 1% prevalence of LM on a food contact surface at any point, and about 2% on floors and drains. And these are nearly 1 million data points in each of these sort of data sets as well. So that's what good looks like. So we get to the legislation. This has been quite traumatic for everybody involved, I think. I'm not quite sure how the hygiene, the biocides industry deals with it, but you know, we've done a lot of work over the last 9 years, as I said, and we've set up the Food and Biocides Industry Group, which I'm leading, CFA, and the web page is there. There's about 20 trade and professional organisations from farm to fork. We have the National Farmer Union, all the way through manufacturing sectors, retail, the BRC, the UK Hospitality Association. Everybody's in there, we're all working together to try and stop biocides regulation inadvertently, stopping us do hygiene, basically. So what we've done about this, here we go, I'm going to tell you a story. When we came along, this is about 2012, and it refers to the the biocides regulation, Biocidal Products Reg 528/2012, in the middle here, the middle of this big mash of circles. That interacted with certain legislation which related to food, like contaminants, feed additives, MRLs for pesticides, food contact materials, baby food. But it didn't link, if you talk at the top left, about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock on this, it didn't link in law to the hygiene of foodstuffs. So it just talked about presence of residues and not interacting with this other legislation in such a way. And we had to argue very strongly for the biocides legislation to actually take account of the fact we need to keep things clean. And we can't be forced to not be able to do that by the law getting rid of biocides that we need to control Listeria and other things. So the big outer circle, by the way, is Food Law 178/2002, which food and feed must be safe is the big thing it says. So until 2016, when we got this link, we had to draw this complex diagram, which, you know, you can do that if you like. So hygiene of foodstuffs now does overlap with the biocides central circle. So we've got that. So you can't just go and look at biocides from a residues perspective. And I'll talk about what residues are versus traces, which is really important, you have to consider the hygiene impacts of getting rid of a biocide before you do so. Full risk assessment. So we achieved that. So then within this, there are 22 categories within the biocidal products reg of product types, and we're dealing with PT4 as food and feed. PT1 is for human hygiene, PT5 is drinking water. There's everything there from creosote, creosote that used to be used for painting fences and things, all sorts of stuff in there, all sorts of biocides. And it's not just about food hygiene. We're really looking at the interaction between pesticides and disinfectants, which I call hygiene biocides, just to be clear. And there is an overlap because quaternary ammonium compounds and chlorates were both used at some point somewhere as a plant protection product. So they are regulated under the pesticides law, but they're also hygiene biocides. And this causes some real problems because if you look at where chlorates arise from, I've already mentioned hypochlorite. So there are all sorts of food contact materials, containers, equipment floors as well, if you get splashed up and stuff. Water disinfection is hugely important. We use chlorinated water. In Holland, they use ultrafiltration and UV, so they're not bothered about getting rid of hypochlorite by law. Hand hygiene, transport, utensils, and produce washing, fresh produce washing, and that is controlled. The other thing we've got now is Brexit on top of this, and GB is coming up with its own regulatory approach. You can see how many UK government agencies are involved in this thing, and European bodies as well. They're not, well, EC is in Brussels, ECHO is in Helsinki, EFSA is in Parma in Italy. So they're not exactly talking to each other all the time. So none of it was joined up at all with different bodies, not even parts of the HSE, which have been extremely helpful to us in getting to where we got to. But there's separate parts in London and York. So it's quite a way away for each other for the UK. So it's been a bit of a mare sorting all this out. So a bit of terminology here. I mentioned residues and traces. Residues result from intentional addition of a regulated active, biological active, biocidal action to a food material, and that's regulated. Traces, that's pesticides, for example. So traces result from unintentional carryover from legitimate use, and that's the reality of stuff. So this is, you chlorinate the water so we don't all get cholera, and then we use water to make beer, wine, spirits, cleaning things, putting it in food in other ways, and so on, and you get carryover. For the dual use biocides, there's a real issue. Why keep on applying plant protection product law to stuff that hasn't been used for years as a PPP, when it's just being used to stop people being killed by microorganisms? The default MRL, maximum residue level, is 0.01 ppm or milligrams per kilogram, which is limit of determination. So really don't want any there. That was what we were facing on chlorate and everything when we started down this track. And the other thing, with all of our fancy foods, the multi-component and processed foods, they're not actually listed in the annex of the legislation. It talks about meat and dairy and many types of produce and herbs and spices, but it doesn't say lasagna anywhere or a sandwich. But the EU and UK said that those products are within scope. So it's been really complicated to sort this one out. Chlorate, ClO3 minus the ion and compounds containing it. It was banned as a PPP by the EU 15, 16 years ago, but like I said, it comes out from mains water. It's coming out of the tap and it's heat stable, so it's going to be there even if you cook. Even if you can something, it's going to be heat stable, so it'll be there. You can't get rid of it from the water. You can't get rid of it. So we did a huge amount of data gathering as UK industry, and we're driving European activity on this one, and we're lobbying for the last 9 years to achieve a workable regulation that reflects the need to protect food hygiene and safety and feed as well, and public health overall, because there's no point taking something out of the biocides armory if people start dying from Listeria. Cranfield University did a report for the Drinking Water Inspectorate in the UK about 15 months ago, and they found that chlorate was present at up to 0.5 milligrams per kilogram in water from high-risk water treatment works. So that's using this sort hypochlorite generation from brine electrolysis, and I think chlorine dioxide was in there as well. And the level was dependent not only on the water treatment works and the technology, but also on the season, because in the summer we get high levels of E. coli from the environment, so you would put more chlorination in to counteract that. That's actually June to September is when we're really growing stuff in the UK, so we're doubly hit with that then. Irrigation water is a good source of chlorate. We're not going to stop chlorinating or otherwise treating water because we do not want pathogens into the crops, particularly raw ready to eat. So the chlorination method, as I said, affects it, and storage tanks cleaning frequency also affects it because chlorate builds up over time. So I had to change this slide this week because we only found out, not being in the EU, that the Drinking Water Directive was published on the 23rd of December. So therefore it came within the transition period, and it's a directive. So we have 2 years, or member states have 2 years to implement it. That sets a maximum level of 0.25 milligrams per litre, which is actually above some of the MRLs that we've ended up with for chlorate in the food. And given that leaf does bioaccumulate chlorate from water, that's very tricky to deal with. It's non-reversible, and you can't get it out of the foodstuff once it's bioaccumulated. We have been assured by DEFRA that the UK will maintain environmental standards. If this is not incorporated into EU law, there'll be no legal imperative on water companies to monitor and control chlorate, which is really a bit of a sticky one for us. So new MRLs came out after a lot of toing and froing, and initial MRLs proposed in November 2015 were unworkable. Then we got much better MRLs that showed we have to use hygiene to control food safety, and that has to be reflected in where you draw the line on the MRL. The reg came out 4th of June last year, came into effect late June, and the range of MRLs for all these different foodstuffs, frogs' legs a lot, but not fish, is 0.01 to 0.7 milligrams per kilogram, and 0.7 is actually the WHO recommendation. That's for the limit. I've got a feeling that broccoli is the top one of the top ones there. With our mixed leaf salads, like you can get sort of pre-cut wash leaf with beetroot, shredded beetroot. What MRL applies to that? And there is actually talk about weighing the beetroot portion of it and trying to apportion the chlorate you might have found proportionately to that part of the food, and it's just getting a bit ridiculous. We did achieve, because of those sort of problems, a special case for processed foods. In this case, the food business operator, the FBO, is allowed to demonstrate that the presence of chlorate in a processed food came from legitimate sources, i.e. from Hygiene Biocides. That's in the water or wash water, or from surface disinfection, food production services. I just thrown in here that we did quite a large submission to the Health and Safety Executive last May, which is on the FBIG web page, which sets out sources of chlorate in food production, mitigations that are in place, and really our desire for the water industry to put in mitigations themselves, because it's coming out of the tap and we can't take it out of the water. Well, 600,000 food businesses installing complicated kit and expensive kit would be it would be too expensive, and you couldn't expect a kebab shop or others to do that. So the argument is to get the water treated at source, and we know it builds up in pipelines, but if we can minimize chlorate at the source, then that would be a start. In our industry and in many parts of the professional food industry, we have supply chain quality assurance by the food business operators. So not just buying something off a market stall and stick it in an M&S food. It doesn't work like that. You have a list of suppliers that are being pre-screened, and their suppliers being pre-screened, and you know where the food came from that you're putting in your lasagna. You know, say for M&S, you would know that it's British beef, and you track back to the farm and the actual cow's ear tags for that batch. So we can go and do that. We can make sure the whole, through third-party accreditation and various layers of assurance, that everything is compliant going back to the chain. So this is a big part of SQA, supplier quality assurance. So we have that. We've had that for decades. So that's one part of the way we can make sure that things haven't been done illegally. because legal compliance is part of all these schemes. Another thing is if you're washing produce, then there's some tips for how to minimize chlorate and water chlorinated on site with hypochlorite, for example, and that's all in various bits of guidance we pulled together. I'm just going to whiz through to wind up multi-component foods. So the example here. So as I said, a sandwich is basically assembled from the parts that are bought in. There will be some washing of the leaf normally. It's already supplied pre-washed by the grower processor, but we'll do it again. So we've got the bread, the butter is largely used, or there could be margarine, produce, protein, and the dressings. So where do the Biosize, in particular chlorate we're thinking about here, come from? Comes from the animal feed, the water that's the animal drank, and the water that's incorporated into the product, and then food contact surface disinfectants and sanitizers. So just working through bread manufacturer, well, you got the irrigation of the wheat in the field, and if there's bioaccumulation into crop, then we can't take it out. You can't get it out. So we've got potable water added in at various points in the bread making process. We've got a lot of food contact surface sanitization throughout all different bits of kit. And of course, as I said, it survives baking. It's heat stable. So that's the bread. So you can see where the chlorate would arise from. Butter manufactured similarly from the milking kits going on the cow's udders, which has to be clean. So there'll be biocide involved in that one, all the way through to the handling of the milk, the cream, and then the production of the butter under contact with the conveyor belts. And there's added water as well at various points. Fresh produce, as I mentioned, the issue here is bioaccumulation by the leaf part. So the actual tomato itself wouldn't have so much as the leaf of the tomato, which we don't eat, thankfully, but we do eat a lot of other leaves. And we've got irrigation water through standard growth outdoors under glass in greenhouses. And then we've got hydroponic growth as well, which of course is high risk from this. And then the food contact surfaces and the crates the tomatoes would go in would be clean. And we've got washing of the leaf in clean water, and it goes on to sanitized conveyor surface. You can see where the chlorate could come from. Similar thing with the chicken. Chicken drinks water, eats food, and the feed will contain potentially traces of chlorate from production processes. Not a great slide there, but you can see where it happens, and then it's food contact surfaces, and it survives the cooking of the chicken, which is then supplied to the sandwich manufacturer along with the bread, butter, and the washed leaf and tomatoes. And this clean all the way through here, Biosize on the surfaces to prevent Mysterio becoming an issue, and just general TVT, aerobic colony counts, all the way through. And we've got the final sandwich being made, and there you go. There's your sandwich. So it's got the whole history of the supply chain in it, and it's ready to eat, and we can't have Listeria in that. So we've got somewhere with Chlorate Quartz is the next one. It's really effective against our target organism, LM. About 6 years ago, 6 years ago, the EU reduced the MRL from 0.5 to 0.1 ppm because somebody was washing vegetables in it, which is really not what it's designed for, and it wasn't in the UK. Because of that reduction in the MRL, people ran away from quartz and started to go to more expensive, fancier biocides, which don't necessarily work as well. And the EU is determined to set MRLs in this, and they paused last summer because we were kept on saying, you can't take this away from us because of Listeria. Then it turns out it was very effective against SARS-CoV-2, so they decided to pause, and they'd also actually proposed MRLs that were too low for the methodology to deal with. That's not dead yet. So winding up on this, where we've got to, we've achieved quite a lot, but we've got to probably go through it all again with Quartz and the whole issue about the future of the biocidal products reg and GB regulation is facing us now, and whatever EU does to its own law, now we're not around the table. But we've got recognition of the need to protect food hygiene and safety and public health overall. The EU has recognised primary sources of chlorate. We've got more rational chlorate MRLs than they originally proposed. We've got a special case for processed foods, and processing is defined in the Hygiene Reg 852/2004. And the FBO, the food business operator, can show that if there is an exceedance, it only came from doing legitimate things from food hygiene. We've developed FBIG and also Global Food Safety Initiative guidance. There's a link there to FBIG. The GFSI thing, I found myself in a couple of groups there, and we produced all sorts of papers on how to minimize traces carrying through into food, which came from the FBIG guidance, and how to do risk assessments. And then we've issued through FBIG various MRL's compliance guidance for large chunks of the food sector, and it's all free. So we've done multi-component foods, fresh and prepared produce, cured meats, dried milk, butter, soft drinks, fruit juices, and we're working on dairy products and specialist nutrition products. So what do we want? We want to protect public health, and we need to make sure that food hygiene isn't dropped from the law as needing to be recognised in Biosize context. We want rational legislation, and this nonsense about non-pesticide hygiene biocides being regulated as pesticides ought to end. We don't want these gold plating to include end products like lasagnas and the rest that aren't listed in the regs. We do want these multi-component foods to be recognised as a special case, and we want all the legislation to link up and not be fighting each other on the regulation. The Chlorate MRL compliance guidance, great if UK, EU industry takes that up, and that's principles have gone into GFSI earlier on, but this is different stuff we're talking about with FBIG now. It's SQA type of role and third-party audits and the rest of it. And we really want a simple and clear enforcement guidance and rationale for the whole regulatory world on this one. And ultimately, we want safe, effective and legally viable hygiene biocides that leave minimal traces in the food. That's all we want. But we cannot stop using biocides. We have to deal with food safety as well. So that's a quick rush through. I'm not sure how I did on time, but happy to take questions through the Q&A.
Karin, thank you very much for a really stimulating and important presentation. I think I was underscored by the many links to Brexit and COVID in your presentation. I see that there are lots of questions in the Q&A section, so I'm going to pass straight over to Will. I think we have time for maybe one question, Will, before we move on to our next speaker, but thanks again, Karin.
Okay. Brilliant, thank you, Brendan. So we've got a few that have been top voted to 3. I will say very quickly that any questions that will be answered offline, which is any that we don't have time to speak in these Q&A sections, will be answered offline by the speakers and then sent round to everyone. So please do keep upvoting any questions you're interested in. That would be great. So the first one that's got 4 votes now comes from Jim Bullock, who's asked that lots of EU regulations how many of them are going to stay in force after the UK leaves the EU? So you've mentioned a few in there about BPR and PPPR, etc.
Right, so it really looks like we're just going to do our own version of things from the last information I had. It won't be UK, it'll be GB, because Northern Ireland is viewed as part of the EU for regulatory purposes. So that's a hot topic, isn't it? So there's no indication there's going to be any move away from this, and it looks like there's going to be another layer of bureaucracy added by the HSE, which is alarming quite a lot of people at the moment.
Brilliant, thank you, Karin.
Something about chlorinated chicken, which is bound to come up. The USA does very high levels of chlorination, and it's not like anything used in that we used to be used in the UK, EU, and it was actually pushed through by German MEPs. It's probably about 10 years ago, because it was widely used and it kept a lid on Campylobacter and the rest of it. So this is just the chlorination. You're not putting chlorine on the chicken, so it's just a misnomer. So the carcasses need to be cooled, and they have to be cooled with clean water, which is chlorinated. If you recycle the water to stop discharge to the environment, because you're not allowed to discharge dirty stuff to the environment under environmental law, then you chlorinate and recycle, and it's to stop the buildup of pathogens. We're not using we weren't using the same sort of levels of chlorination as the USA does. And it comes down to why would you need to use such chlorination? And we have lower stocking densities in the chicken sheds, basically. So there is not so much interaction between the birds. They're not crammed so close together. So this is an animal welfare thing, not a food safety thing. Phage treatment, yeah, I've been a big fan of phage for a while. The clarity in EU law is needed. It's not banned, it's not overtly permitted. And well, I'm hoping the legislation will catch up, and there's all sorts of things I'm involved in on that one, so I'm not going to say any more on that one.